last thing in the world I want to be is the naysayer of someone else's drive. So last week I told an April Fool's related car story about Evan's van, and I've actually got another April Fool's car story, but rather than waiting another year, I figured I'd just go ahead and tell it today. So back in 2013, after we arrived at Redondo Beach and set the Cannonball record, we got to LAX the next day and I decided it was time to call Alex Roy. So I called him and he picks up his cell phone and he says, "So how does it feel?" I said, "Well, Alex, it feels great, but how did you know?" He said, "Well, you sent me that text message a couple of days ago." I said, "Alex, no, I didn't. I hadn't texted him in 4 or 5 months." I said, "We just finished last night." And he said, "Well, what was your time?" I said, 28 hours and 50 minutes. I said, "I know it sounds crazy." He's like, "BS." I said, "I know, man, we've got all the proof and everything else. I'll let you see it." But apparently someone else had attempted it within the last few days. They had texted him a very quick thing from a number he didn't recognize. And it was just a time that was slightly slower than his time of 31 hours, 4 minutes. And so, we kind of went on from that. And eventually as the story spread, Alex never really commented on any of the stories. He would occasionally engage in the comments on like Jalopnik, but never would provide like an official statement for any of the journalists. And it took me a long time to really figure out what kind of losing that top spot on the leaderboard meant to him, because over the course of the next several months, I was in New York City several times for different engagements, and every time we would set a time, date, and place for dinner to kind of finally catch up in person, and every single time he would stand me up. So it wasn't until several years later that I really got to see him in person on the other side of setting the record. But as Doug DeMuro's article released in Jalopnik a couple weeks after our record, we figured out who it was that had texted Alex. Because one of the commenters said, "This time is crazy. I did the drive a week before them and ran into all this weather and traffic and issues, and there's no way they did 28 hours, 50 minutes. And the commenter's name was Greg Ledet. And he had done like 31 hours and 17 minutes, and he had texted Alex that. And he actually asked DeMuro if he would pass his number along to me so that he and I could speak. So Doug sent me his phone number and I called this guy. And he explains what he had done. And I told him, "Yep, I know it sounds crazy, but here's all we've got." I sent him a few pictures. I said, "Hey, I'm not going to send you every data point because it's far too incriminating to exist even on the internet right now. But you're welcome to come over here and see it, and I'll show it to you in a year if you want." And he and I actually got pretty close. We would text pretty often and talk and call each other on the phone and stuff like that and just talk about different cannonballing ideas. But those conversations kind of got a little bit strange around the end of March in 2015, because he told me that one of our mutual acquaintances was going to make an attempt at the record that upcoming weekend, and that they were in an exceptionally well sorted out and qualified car, and they were a good driver, but that he was sworn to secrecy. I didn't necessarily ever intend to hold the record forever, and at that point, kind of starting to have learned what it meant to Alex to have lost the record, a big thing to me was like to not put myself in that position of vulnerability. I wanted to be helpful. I wanted to facilitate the craft, the hobby, whatever you want to call it, of the small group of idiots that cared about this sort of thing. And so I've been pretty open about what I thought it would take to break our record and stuff like that. And so I was excited, honestly, about the prospect of someone else trying it, but he was being so cagey and so cryptic that it was really, really peculiar. And over the next few days, he makes all these crazy posts, geotagging himself in different parts of essentially going from Ohio, where he lived, towards New York, then around New York City, and then on his way back west. And then over the course of the weekend, he was feeding me forged data about their timestamped location, as he was apparently in the car driving with whoever this mysterious cannonballer was. Then we see an arrival apparently in Southern California from Greg's Facebook post and things like that. And then we start to see some posts from guys like Jack Baruth on Twitter and things like that, saying that they were at the Portofino reviewing footage. And a few days later, on March 31st, not April 1st, an article is released on The Truth About Cars by Jack Baruth. Now, I've never met Jack Baruth in person, but I knew him somewhat by reputation, and I knew that for reasons I could never understand, he seemed to hate me. And over the course of the couple of years prior to that, it seemed like Alex had kind of fed him things that he wanted to say that might be mean about me, but that he didn't feel comfortable saying himself. So Jack had said some pretty mean things about me, but again, I never really understood why. I've never met the guy even until now. But, he's a journalist, and I suppose well respected, and so I wished him all the best. best, but I didn't really understand how some beef had ever, arrived upon me, apart from the fact that I knew Baruth and Alex were close. And I also knew that Jack Baruth and Alex Roy and Matt Farah had a few weeks prior to that made a cross-country drive in Farah's million-mile Lexus, or I guess at that point his 850,000-mile Lexus. But the article said that it was in fact Alex and his co-driver, Dave Maher, who had done the drive along with Greg Ledet. And it wove this fantastic tale of them using an Infiniti Q50 that was fully Nissan GTR powertrain swapped and spent not just the $500,000 that Alex was purported to have spent on his original record, but almost 3 times that, with a 3 night vision camera, roof-mounted turret, and dual steering wheels. And they had hired 50 off-duty police officers to serve as scouts throughout their route and had an insane average, 26 hours and change. So truly beaten my record by almost as much as I had beaten his. And, it was crazy because it was so out of this world, and certainly if anybody was going to spend that much money, it was going to be Alex to take the record back. But, he had always told me that, his lawyers had said that he couldn't witness any runs. He told me, in fact, not to tell him when I was going to go, not to tempt him with sabotage or anything like that. I was in this really awkward position as this article rolls out late in the evening on the 31st of March in 2015. And I get calls from everybody like, "Oh man, I'm so sorry, your record got broken." I'm like, yeah, it's crazy. And the next day, Tavarish, Freddie Hernandez, writes an article, again for The Truth About Cars, kind of talking about the car, but not having any pictures. And the article from the night before also didn't really have any pictures. There was just a picture of Alex Roy with a GPS that he was holding. And the numbers were there, but they weren't exactly right. They put a caption below the photo saying, due to a bug in the navigation software, 2 of the numbers were switched because the overall average was somehow higher than the moving average. They were obviously transposed. So that was a red flag, but they had at least some excuse as to this update that we did corrupted something, and that's why these numbers were displayed incorrectly. But of course, there were no other circumstantial pictures, but it was in a mainstream news media blog car thing on The Truth About Cars, and multiple people had kind of chimed in saying it. And their goal obviously in that moment was to spread the article as much as possible. And the only really fully legitimate article that came out based on that was Popular Mechanics from Alexander George. He had written articles about me and Alex previously, and he was apparently the only person that would take Alex at his word that this had happened, because no proof was really being offered, despite all the claims that there was infinite amounts of proof that existed about this drive. So Popular Mechanics called me for a quote, and I told him, I don't really know what to say. I mean, the last thing in the world I want to be is the naysayer of someone else's drive, because when Alex had poked and chimed in that, Ed may not have enough proof, even though all the media outlets had checked it and spoken to the GPS tracking things, and everything else was very, very thoroughly vetted at that point, it hurt me that this guy that I had looked up to and hoped to have a relationship with, at least in the camaraderie of this kind of a pursuit, had always resisted that up to that point. And so, I didn't want to be in that position, but at the same time, there really was nothing out there to really prove that this had happened. And then Greg Ledet goes on trying to do an AMA on Reddit, talking about his involvement in the drive and stuff like that. But then several days later, it takes not just the next day, but several days for them to issue a retraction. And they don't really frame it as an April Fool's joke. They frame it as a hoax to poke at this idea that it doesn't take anything for media to get sensationalized into proliferating a story that may or may not be true. And really, the only place that had proliferated it was Popular Mechanics, and only because they'd been explicitly lied to. And so they issued a retraction as well. And I didn't really know what to do. I mean, obviously I was hurt, because this idea that people drive really fast across the country is obviously kind of this crazy notion. And it's obviously something that happens, and it's happened a lot since then, but the idea of proof and layers of proof and being able to really show anyone else that might care that you actually did this was really a secondary issue to kind of the craziness of the claims. To most interested parties, they say, all right, Ed drove this fast, Alex drove this fast, Richard Rawlings and Dennis Collins drove this fast, whatever the case may be. They don't really look like, I wonder if they had enough proof. Alex had always made it this big thing about evidence, so to transition into suddenly we're going to lie about this to make some point, to me, it just, when they asked me from Popular Mechanics the next day, what did I think about it? I said, it kind of cheapens the craft, and it makes it seem like we can't play well with each other internally amongst the people that care about this idea. I said, it kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth, and it was so aggressive towards me. It wasn't just a hoax. It wasn't just an April Fool's joke. It was very much psychological warfare for the preceding week or even more, directed solely at me. It was really kind of broke my heart that I had to deal with that, and it was definitely a stressful week of not knowing what to say, what to do, what to acknowledge, what to share, because it's still very much a pursuit, a craft, an idea that I care about, but certainly I didn't like the way that had played out. So I ended up just making kind of a tongue-in-cheek response, congratulating them on a successful hoax on my website, and me and Dave Black made a picture of, that we re-photoshopped in the same way they had, different nav screen showing that we had done it in less than 24 hours and in a Countach with mobile refueling and stuff like that, just as, I guess, something to put up as a response. But it changed a lot about the dynamic, particularly between me and Ledet, who, again, we were talking very often. He sat at a desk all day. I sat at a desk between going on test drives and selling cars. And he kind of was like, oh, what did you think? And I was like, dude, certainly it wasn't something that I liked. I didn't appreciate it. I didn't see the real point in using it as a hoax and this thing that we actually care a lot about, people knowing that you have to prove that you do this. You just kind of said, well, I'm going to make a joke of all that. And it's kind of like, well, if I can't have the record on Alex's part and really his part, that we're just going to kind of flip over the sandbox. And I have no idea if any of them got out of it what they really wanted, if they made the point they wanted, but at the very least, it was a very, very strange week to have been me. Last year, Sonny and I tried out Avalon King's Armor Shield 9 ceramic coating on my Porsche 993, and it came out great, and since then it's been much easier to keep clean. You can see the story about that here, but more importantly, this month we're going to try it out on my LP640. The car's finally done being repainted, and right now AP3 is putting a clear bra on the whole car, and on top of that, we're going to put the ceramic coating to make it look better and easier to clean. So if you'd like to try that out on your car, you can click the link in the description below.